Process, honored for 3 consecutive years with the Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Outstanding Talk Program Series.
I couldn't believe they were serious. And when they told me that I was being charged with child endangerment, I said, these are the people that mean the most to me.
The government claimed that her family photos of her 2 small granddaughters were indecent. Indecent as in nude. Proper police work or police paranoia? When is nudity pornographic, and who should decide on this edition of Due Process?
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
Nudity. These days, it's even on network TV. And when it comes to cable, everyone is taking their clothes off. But when the subjects are children, it is still a very sensitive subject, as one Montclair grandmother found out. I'm Raymond Brown, and on our docket for this edition, a Due Process exclusive, the case of a part-time photographer who picked up her camera one day and found her life nearly ruined the next. Sandy King is here to pick up the story.
Raymond, it is the story of a woman who says she still can't believe what happened to her. Not just her arrest, but what she was arrested for, endangering the people whom she says she loves most. Her story is new, but her case has raised some old questions about nudity and pornography, the innocence of childhood, the exploitation of children, about how intention and interpretation can sometimes be worlds apart.
I've always walked around with a camera. I got my first camera when I was 9. And in fact, my Brownie box camera is in the other room.
Marion Rubin may earn her living as a school social worker, but her heart is in photography.
I still get excited when I see the sunrise. I have a million pictures of the sunrise.
So sometimes she does shoot a sunrise or a bird or a friend, but her favorite subjects are her favorite people.
I've made a calendar for my kids, and actually I guess for myself, with the pictures that I considered the best of the previous year.
So this doting 67-year-old grandmother will show you as many pictures of her 2 granddaughters as you're willing to look at.
Here you can see Grammy's spring recess. This is Kayla eating chocolate ice cream.
You like these kids?
I love them.
But it was some pictures she took last year, nude pictures of the girls, then 3 and 8, that changed the way she looks at the world and the way that the world looks at her.
They probably figured that in their mind I didn't suffer too much. I got a year off from work with pay, got to stay home. I mean, a lot of people said to me, gee, I wish somebody would pay me to stay home. You know? They have no idea of the anguish, of the fact that I guess to some people I'll always be the Montclair grandmother.
The Montclair grandmother who got busted for shooting nude photos of her 2 young granddaughters.
One day on my way to work, I dropped off a roll of film at Moto Photo. Included was my name and phone number.
But it was when she returned to pick up the prints that the nightmare began.
2 men approached me and asked if I was Marion Rubin. I said yes, and I got very frightened. I thought maybe something had happened to someone in my family. Why were they looking for me?
The men were Montclair detectives who apparently agreed with the Photoshop that something was very wrong with the pictures.
Next thing I know, they're reading me my Miranda rights. I couldn't believe they were serious. And when they told me that I was being charged with child endangerment, I said, these are the people that mean the most to me. These are the light of my life. You know, I'd walk in front of a truck for them before I would endanger them or hurt them in any way.
But Rubin was barred from even speaking to the girls who were questioned in graphic detail by Dyfus.
Had I known a year ago what they asked her, I think I would have killed myself. They asked her, did I ask her to spread her legs? Did I ask her to touch herself? Did I get undressed when I took these pictures? Did I touch myself?
And she says
And
when her
things of
son
that
and
nature.
daughter-in-law tried to defend her,
And this is
they
something
were
she
warned
said
they
she
could
never-
lose their daughters. And then there was her job.
They just told me I was suspended with pay until it was resolved. And even though I wasn't surprised, it felt like a kick in the stomach.
So Rubin says she did consider suicide.
But then I realized that if I killed myself, it would look like guilt. They'd say, oh, well, she couldn't face the music, and therefore, and I said, no way.
But if facing the music meant going to trial, it was more than Rubin was willing to take.
I just didn't want the kids to go through that. I could possibly, I guess, have been found guilty. I was 65 years old. I mean, I don't want to spend the rest of my life, involved in this.
So when she was offered pre-trial intervention as a way of making it all go away, she swallowed her pride and agreed.
I was given probation. I met my probation officer for the first time 2 weeks before the case was dismissed. There was no requirement.
No
I mean,
counseling.
no counseling.
And no official vindication. No apology from authorities who still won't return what she still insists are innocent photos.
You can't just say that nudity is pornography. And I think that's really sad. I mean, it's nuts. It's gotten really crazy.
But Rubin's life is getting back to normal with her job and with her grandkids.
You do still take pictures of the girls,
Oh, yeah.
not nude pictures.
I haven't in the past year.
What she has done is filed suit against police to get her photos back and written a book whose back cover will warn, if you've ever taken a photo of your child naked, you must read this book.
I feel that I've lost, again, my innocence, my trust in the world being a safe place, my trust that the justice system is going to look after me, that I didn't commit a crime and therefore they're going to take care of me and the truth is going to come out, justice will prevail. And I find it very frightening.
But why did Marion Rubin take those nude photos to begin with? She says she takes pictures of the girls at every opportunity. And on the day in question, she says, they had just taken a shower and were dancing around her room with their clothes still off. She says it was the most natural thing to pick up her camera and start shooting. And she insists, Raymond, that it is also only natural that she now wants those photos back.
The lawyer who's filed suit to get those photos back, and a former Bergen County prosecutor who says it's law enforcement's job to protect children first. That's when we come back, so stay with us.
What is pornography? Nude pictures and photographs, ain't it?
What is graphic depiction of sexual acts that are offensive?
Anything to do with a child or something that's abusive.
Anything can be pornographic, anything that's offensive to another person.
Pornography is anything indecent, meaning not just nudity.
Nudity in a disgusting way. It's not paintings and portraits.
Depends on the age and the person involved and stuff like that. It's more what I consider pornography for me is not what I consider for my daughters.
The government should, regulate some sort of standard, They do have some sort of responsibility.
But it's not just our folks on the street who have a hard time figuring out what is indecent and what's not. It's an old dispute, but here to help us sort out some new answers, Jeff Fogel, former director of the ACLU in New Jersey, now in private practice, representing the Montclair grandmother we met in our opening segment, and Josh Donahue, a former Bergen County prosecutor and a self-described hardliner on child pornography and child endangerment. Welcome to both of you. Jeff, let me start with you. We know that you can't talk in detail about the case involving the grandmother because that's still an ongoing legal dispute. But we do want to talk about the principles that we can extract from it. And I guess the first question I would ask you is whether the law is sufficiently clear that ordinary citizens know what is illegal with respect to this question of what's nudity that's acceptable with respect to children and what nudity crosses the line into pornography and child endangerment.
Well, I think there's always a gap between what the law may say and what people understand the law to say. The law, it seems to me, is fairly clear, though, from the lawyer's perspective and from the perspective of what the cases have developed. The Supreme Court some years ago declared that child pornography could be prohibited by the states much more broadly than obscenity for adults, and said what could be prohibited was sexually explicit conduct depicted of children. Okay. That's the standard.
Okay, but just from the descriptions we've had, and again, I'm trying to tread the line of not drawing us too deeply into that case, it sounds as though whatever the photographs looked like, they weren't explicit in the sense that they were sexual objects or other things that said sex, but something about the poses that caused the Photoshop, police, and prosecutors to have a different view. Was there a clear line that they were talking about, or is it a line about which people could have a dispute?
Well, there's the one area most difficult for both, I think, lawyers, courts, and people to understand. Our statute in New Jersey specifically prohibits the depiction of children in specific sexual acts, but it also prohibits the depiction of children with nudity if the nudity is depicted for the sexual gratification of anyone who is likely to view the photo. Now, you have to look at that in perspective of what the statute's attempting to do, which is to stop the trafficking in child pornography. So if you read that section about prohibited nudity where it is depicted for the purpose of sexual gratification, it is for the purpose of preventing the distribution of literature within the, say, stream of trafficking in child pornography.
Well, I want to draw Josh into the conversation. He wasn't even involved in that case, although he knows about this subject pretty well. It sounds as though no one has even alleged that this grandmother had the intention of putting these photos on the webs or distributing them in any way. But yet prosecutors thought the photos themselves went over the line from nudity into something clear. Do you think that it's relevant to consider whether or not a person intended to use this for gratification of others or not?
It's absolutely relevant for purposes of the statute in New Jersey. This woman, Miss Rubin, the grandmother, was charged with endangering the welfare of a child. And as has already been stated, I mean, the real critical issue is if this photo was depicted for purpose of sexual stimulation or gratification. In other words, what was the purpose of the photo? It seems to me, and I haven't viewed the photos, but the way they've been described is this: there was either a 4 or a 6-year-old on a bed that appeared to be
3 and an 8, right? But you're in the realm we're talking about.
That appeared to be posing for a photo, and their genitals were exposed. That's the issue, and I think that you've got to be extremely careful taking photos of little kids.
I think everybody would draw the conclusion from this case that care is appropriate. But let me go a little further. You mentioned genitals exposed. Now, I got to tell you, over my lifetime, I have seen hundreds, more than I want to look at, of photographs of myself, family members, when they were children, 2, 3, 4, with genitals exposed, and I think most people would look at those photographs and say, nothing to them. So the mere fact of exposing the genitals in the photograph of a 3, 4, 5-year-old is not in and of itself the answer. There presumably would have to be more. And again, we're talking the abstract, but I think we all know that lots of times we see photographs of little children completely naked, and it's not shocking. You even see them on the beach sometimes.
That's correct.
So it isn't something as symbolic or magical as genitals exposed. There's got to be something else. And I guess the question I was asking was, let's assume you were satisfied that there isn't any intention on a person's part to distribute it, to profit from it, to share it with others outside of a family. Jeff's description of the law seemed to suggest that that intent to distribute it or share it or use it in that way was an important part. As a prosecutor, would that be an important factor, what the person seemed to intend to do with photographs?
Oh, it is an important factor, but what the statute says is what's the purpose of the photo?
Okay.
Is the photo, as you described, as you're growing up, people just capture moments in children's lives. Is that the purpose of it, just to capture a moment in these child's lives, to look back at them when they're older, or is the purpose sexual stimulation or gratification? It appears to me, the way the photos are described, we have a young girl on a bed who appears to be posing for a photo, and her genitals are exposed. And you put it quite aptly at the beginning of the program. The prosecutor, the person in the Photoshop, and the police all thought the same thing. And they charged this woman with a second-degree crime, extremely serious crime in the state of New Jersey. So you have to look at the purpose of the photo, as well as what she was going to do with the photos.
Let me ask you this, Jeff. Let's assume, I mean, we'd have to assume, we know that in this particular case, folks in Montclair found these photos as offensive and sexual in a way that violated the statute.
You say folks, you say several police officers.
Some folks, some
Yes.
people did.
Okay.
But I'm trying to broaden it for a deliberate purpose. I'm trying to say, in the broader realm of obscenity for adults, community standards have been a factor that the courts have considered in many levels. Is it possible that people in Cherry Hill or in Cape May might have a different view than those in Bergen County? I'm talking about policemen, law enforcement, or those who might trigger an investigation, like Photoshop people. And does that affect how the law works?
Well, let me deal with the latter. It doesn't affect how the law works, because in the obscenity area, we're looking at the impact either on unwilling viewers or attempting to impose a sense of public morality on what's seen in public. In child pornography area, we're looking at the harm that's done to the children, independent of what harm may befall those who observe it. So it shouldn't matter in that regard, because we're very different interests are being protected. But the issue here is whether or not the police in this instance, or the prosecutor's office, or anybody else thought these photos were indecent. That's their business. They're entitled to their opinion. What they're not entitled to do is to impose their moral values, particularly using the criminal justice system, on this poor grandmother.
Well, what should they be? Let's take it away from this case. What should a police officer alerted by a Photoshop, for example, what should that person have in his mind? You're obviously saying not his personal sense of decency.
Clearly not.
But what should he be looking for when he looks at the photographs to decide whether to take them back to the detectives or call the prosecutor?
Well, as I said, in some instances it's simple. The statute prohibits the depiction of certain sexual acts by children. I don't think we would ever disagree over what those would be, and they would be easy. The one vague area is this area of nudity, where depicted for the purpose of the sexual gratification of a person likely to see it. If the police thought that those pictures were likely to go into the stream of pornographic child pornography, trafficking, because that's really the issue, then it would seem to me appropriate for them to investigate the person, as they did here. They learned early on that this woman had no intention of distributing these photos.
Josh, do you agree with what he said? Because essentially Jeff is saying, look, we would instruct the police officer, independent of his own sense of morality or what's offensive, to decide whether or not there are nude photographs likely to be moved into the stream of commerce or used and distributed. And that having decided no, if that's the decision, that there ought not be further inquiry. Do you agree with that instruction that Jeff would give the police officer?
I disagree with that entirely. I think you have to look at the photo itself, and you have to look at it and see what is its purpose. Why is this person that's taking this photo doing this? Is the purpose a benign one, or is the purpose to sexually stimulate someone that views it? That's the issue. And I go back to the same point. 3 sets of eyes looked at this. A lay person in the the person at the Photoshop, the police officers, and also the prosecutors. They decided to charge this woman with this crime. So I agree that part of the issue is what's she going to do with this? Is it going to go into the stream of commerce, or is it going to stay in her home?
This is such a compelling case, Marion's case, that we keep talking to. But let me get you then where I had Jeff. Talk to the police officer, man or woman, who's about to go out and respond to a Photoshop and make their own initial judgment about whether even to take up your time or someone else's time. Tell them what they're looking for. We know the photographs are nude, but not overtly sexual in the sense of involving other people. So what are you telling this police officer to look for when they look at these photographs?
I would ask them to look to see, describe to me the position of this young girl, where she is. Is she in a bedroom? Is she in a swimming pool? Is it a photo of a birth? Describe to me where she is, how her genitals and how her legs are positioned, and is it a full frontal shot of this child? And what's the age of the child? Or does he believe the age of the child is?
Now, Jeff, earlier you pointed out that there is a huge difference between obscenity when we deal with adults and the questions involved with children. But it's hard for people who haven't studied the law as you and Josh have to see the universe of difference between, for example, the kind of explicit sexuality you can see on the web or even on cable television. On a number of programs, it's easy. Any given night, we can go out tonight, watch cable in a bar, and we're going to see full frontal nudity in the context of embraces. We're going to see at least simulation of sexuality. And it's obviously, at least in this moment in time, not subject to prosecution. That is a huge different universe than the universe of values and attitudes we bring towards children.
Clearly, and appropriately so, because we're protecting minors, people who the society have judged are not competent yet to make decisions on their own, even about the exposure of their own body. And we do know, and I don't disagree, the harmful effects to children from their use of their depiction in as sexual images for others not only hurts them in the instance and when it's taken, but it can hurt them in later years as well, knowing that it's around. But that doesn't answer the question, I think, that is posed to the investigator. Because what Josh says, I don't disagree with in the initial phases of looking, should we look at this investigation? But once you make the determination that the person who took the pictures had no interest in obtaining sexual gratification, distributing these photos for that purpose, end of investigation.
Right,
then it's nobody else's business but
let
the
me ask you a
family's.
question. Let's assume, as in this case, that there's no intent to distribute. But we know as lawyers, and every one of our viewers who's ever been a juror knows, we're asked often to look in a person's mind and figure out their purpose. With a person like this grandmother, how do you go about looking into her mind to decide what her purpose was in this kind of situation? Because essentially now it's down to, did she have a sexual purpose or a sexual feeling in the context of this photographic session?
Well, this was an easy case, I would say to you. The police obtained 2 search warrants. They took, as you know, the woman was an amateur photographer. They took all of her photographs, all of her negatives, all of her contact sheets. They took her CD-ROMs. They took her computers. There would be some evidence there somewhere that there was an intent to distribute if there was such an intent. There was no such intent. There was immediately a DYFS investigation initiated within days of this. They interviewed the children. They came to the conclusion that the children had not been subject to any abuse or endangerment. End of case.
Okay. Jeff is being the skilled advocate he always is, and he's taking advantage of us because we haven't seen the photographs and don't know the details. So let me abstract his question. He's alleging that in this case there was some overreaching by prosecutors. Given the fact that there obviously is some area for discretion here, does it happen that in this area it's possible and even likely that on occasion prosecutors will overreach precisely because some of these boundaries are vague, especially if you find a person who, as in this case, let's posit, didn't have pornography around, and we're talking about an isolated set of photographs?
Prosecutors overreach all the time.
I'm shocked that you would say, here on due process. Is this an exclusive, Josh?
It's an exclusive. It's not an exclusive. It's just the way it is. And prosecutors often overcharge. However, this kind of case, this is a sex case. There are certain crimes in the state of New Jersey that are direct response crimes, wherein, I'm talking at the state level, these kinds of crimes, sex crimes, homicides, certain other crimes, require input from the prosecutor when the investigation is being done. Other crimes, say theft crimes, certain theft crimes, the police will run their own investigation, put a package together, present it to the prosecutor. In this case, it's a sex crime. In this case, I don't know for certain, but I would bet that Morris County had almost immediate input into the case and into the way the case was charged.
The prosecutor's office, as opposed to just the police, the prosecutors would be involved early in making these judgments.
That's right, and I would suggest to you that they thought long and hard, a lawyer thought long and hard, as well as the prosecutor himself, before charging this woman with a second-degree crime.
One of the reasons we know perhaps that this is a very nuanced case is that normally a second-degree crime in New Jersey carries with it a presumption that you're going to jail. So for that to wind up as a PTI, which is a pretrial, essentially probation without an admission of guilt, and if you satisfy the conditions, you are faced with no crime at all, no record, that would suggest that prosecutors themselves thought there were some areas of nuance or a gray area in here.
Could be.
I mean, it means both sides thought it was a gray area, otherwise it wouldn't have been this agreement, but prosecutors as well.
Prosecutors are supposed to do the right thing, and as a prosecutor, whenever you are in doubt, that's the question in your mind. As a defense attorney, criminal defense attorney, your obligations are different than a prosecutor. But the prosecutor's job is to do the right thing. It doesn't mean just because this woman, the prosecutor consented to her entry into PTI, it doesn't mean that the prosecutor thought their case was flawed.
No, I didn't say flawed. Okay, we got 45 seconds, Jeff. Your client has written a book where she says, beware. What lesson do you draw for us at large?
Certainly from her perspective, I don't blame her for wanting to beware because what happened to her was quite shocking. $50,000 bail, prohibited from seeing her grandchildren and so on. But let me just also mention there are other dangers involved here also, because when they went to the judge to get a search warrant, they got a search warrant to search her house for photographs, videotapes, movies, books, notebooks. Now this is the kind of warrant that resulted in the Fourth Amendment. the kind of what we were then called the general assistance warrant being issued by the king, looking for subversives, broadly allowing a look through things that are otherwise protected by the First Amendment. So there are other dangers here aside from the mere prosecution.
A constitutional warning from Jeff, who is Paul Revere today. Josh, thank you for being with us as well. That's it for this edition of Due Process. We'll be back next week with more real stories of law and social justice, more of the kinds of issues that make due process different. Till then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
My older granddaughter was lying on the bed, and there she is, naked. She's built like a toothpick. I think she weighs like 45 pounds. So I put a book in her hand. The book happened to be a book that my boyfriend was reading called How to Make Money in Stocks. And this seems to be the photograph that has appalled the prosecutor and the police the most. I don't understand to this day why they find this picture provocative or what it implies. And to me, there was humor in the idea. The concept was, here's this little skinny kid reading a very grown-up book, looking intellectual. And that was the only connection I made when I took the picture. I thought it was funny.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,